a campaign supported by so many wonderful partners that help break the stigma around mental health.
In the gilded world of royalty, where every gesture carries meaning, a quiet storm brews behind palace walls. Catherine, Princess of Wales, long admired for her devotion to charity, sought to honor Princess Diana's legacy through her foundation. Yet what should have been a moment of unity has turned into heartbreak. Reports suggest Queen Camilla, wielding her influence with careful precision, secretly blocked Catherine's plans. Was this an act of palace politics or something far more personal? Tonight, we uncover the hidden power struggle shaking the monarchy and why Diana's legacy has once again become a battlefield of the crown, a royal mission of the heart. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has often been described as the beating heart of the modern monarchy. Unlike the stiff and formal image once associated with the royal family, Catherine has built her reputation on warmth, empathy, and a hands-on approach to charitable work. From her early patronages focusing on children and mental health to her tireless advocacy for families, she has carved a role that mirrors much of what the late Princess Diana embodied. To Catherine, charity is not merely a royal duty to be ticked off a list of appearances. It is the soul of her public life, the place where she feels most aligned with her calling as a mother, a future queen, and a woman who wants to leave a meaningful legacy. For years, whispers surrounded the idea that Catherine would one day take on more formal ties to Diana's charitable work. The late Princess of Wales remains one of the most revered figures in modern history, her causes immortalized in the memories of those she touched. Diana was known for her fearless compassion, whether walking through landmine fields in Angola or embracing AIDS patients when others recoiled. To step into that space, even partially, would not only honor Diana's memory, but also create a seamless bridge between past and present, linking William's wife directly to his mother's enduring legacy. It was no secret that Catherine long admired Diana. Though she never met her, Catherine has often expressed how much she hopes her children will come to know their grandmother through the values she lived for. Taking on a role in Diana's foundation seemed the natural evolution of this mission. It promised not just a symbolic gesture, but a practical way of keeping Diana's flame alive in the service of others. For Catherine, this was never about politics. It was about love. It was about her children knowing that their mother, like their grandmother before her, stood as a defender of the voiceless. The idea began to take shape quietly. Advisors close to Catherine discussed potential projects under the foundation's umbrella that could align with her existing initiatives on early childhood development. There was a vision of joining Diana's legacy of global compassion with Catherine's own focused and strategic approach to social issues. It was meant to be a new chapter in royal philanthropy, one that carried both emotional weight and forward-looking energy. Behind closed doors, meetings were planned, proposals drafted, and quiet conversations took place about how best to unveil this powerful connection. For Catherine, this mission felt deeply personal. It was not about making headlines, but about weaving herself into the tapestry Diana left behind. She envisioned herself standing before young mothers, children, and communities in need, carrying the same torch Diana once carried, a torch fueled by humanity and genuine care. It was to be her own royal mission of the heart, one that transcended titles and protocol. In her mind, this was not just an act of duty. It was a promise fulfilled, a way of ensuring that Diana's spirit would not merely remain a memory, but continue to live on through action, compassion, and love. The shadow of Diana's legacy. Catherine's vision, though noble and deeply personal, was not without its complications. To invoke the name of Princess Diana was to step into one of the most powerful and delicate legacies in modern royal history. In the previous chapter, we saw how Catherine's desire to honor Diana grew from a place of genuine love and devotion. Yet such a decision carried with it consequences far beyond her personal intentions. Diana's story is not only one of compassion, but also of turbulence, rebellion, and conflict with the very institution Catherine now represents. To embrace Diana's foundation was to embrace both the light of her humanitarian spirit and the shadows of her stormy relationship with the monarchy. For the British public, Diana remains the people's princess, a woman whose image is forever frozen in time as a figure of kindness, vulnerability, and courage. Even decades after her passing, Diana's presence looms large over the House of Windsor. She is the eternal reference point, the measure by which the younger royals are judged, and the silent reminder of a painful chapter that the monarchy has never fully escaped. Any move to connect directly with her charitable work, therefore, raises expectations, emotions, and comparisons. Catherine, despite her own strong reputation, knows that walking in Diana's footsteps would invite both admiration and scrutiny. Yet there was something magnetic in the thought of Catherine stepping into that role. Observers often note that her natural grace, her empathy, and her ability to connect with ordinary people echo Diana's qualities. It was not a matter of imitation, but of resonance, as though fate had placed Catherine in a position to gently restore Diana's legacy to the heart of the monarchy. In public imagination, the idea of William's wife championing his mother's causes would symbolize continuity, healing, and a restoration of trust between the crown and the people. It would be a poetic closing of a circle, a daughter-in-law honoring the woman who shaped her husband's life and inspired the world. But inside the palace, the weight of Diana's name carried another kind of significance. Senior figures often tread carefully when dealing with Diana's memory, for it still evokes the divisions and scandals that shook the monarchy in the 1990s. To some, Diana's foundation represented not only her compassion but also her independence, her willingness to step outside the traditional boundaries of royal duty. Associating Catherine too closely with that legacy risked reviving old wounds. It threatened to remind the public of the rivalry between Diana and the royal establishment, a rivalry that many would argue was never fully resolved. And so, while Catherine's heart saw only an opportunity to continue Diana's work, the institution around her saw a complex inheritance, one layered with both potential and peril. To the world, Diana's legacy remains a powerful symbol of love. To the palace, it is also a reminder of vulnerability. Catherine's noble mission to bring Diana's flame into the present would therefore unfold in the shadow of all that Diana once was and all that she still represents. Behind palace doors, Camilla's quiet resistance. The deeper Catherine's plans intertwined with Diana's legacy, the more the atmosphere inside the palace began to shift. As explored in the previous chapter, Diana's memory is both an enduring source of inspiration and a lingering shadow over the monarchy. Within that shadow stands Queen Camilla, a woman whose very presence in the royal family is forever linked to Diana's story. Camilla has spent years carefully rebuilding her image, working quietly but steadily to transform herself from one of the most controversial figures in Britain to the respected consort of a reigning king. Yet despite this transformation, the name of Diana still casts a long and unyielding shadow over her reign. It is against this backdrop that Catherine's plans to connect with Diana's foundation stirred whispers of unease. To the public, Catherine's involvement promised warmth, compassion, and continuity. But to Camilla, the prospect of Diana's memory being revived with such force carried risks of its own. The Queen Consort had worked tirelessly to separate herself from the scandals of the past, to redefine herself as a figure of stability beside Charles. Allowing Catherine to step so prominently into Diana's charitable world threatened to reignite comparisons that Camilla had spent decades trying to leave behind. In private, those close to the royal household speak of Camilla's influence not as loud proclamations but as soft, deliberate nudges. Her power is quiet, exercised through subtle suggestions and measured counsel rather than direct confrontation. She has learned that within the palace, persuasion often achieves more than open opposition. When Catherine's advisors began floating proposals about integrating Diana's foundation with her work, the response from certain senior figures was unexpectedly hesitant. Doors that once seemed open began to close, projects were delayed without explanation, and discussions that appeared promising one week were quietly shelved the next. To many, this pattern bore the unmistakable mark of Camilla's quiet resistance. Catherine, unaware at first, believed these delays to be the natural obstacles of royal bureaucracy. After all, nothing in the monarchy moves quickly. But as the setbacks mounted, it became harder to ignore the invisible hand shaping the outcome. The idea of Diana's foundation was not being openly rejected, but neither was it being allowed to flourish. It was as though an unseen wall had risen around her plans, one built from hesitation, discretion, and the careful guarding of palace politics. For Camilla, this resistance was not necessarily born from malice, but from caution. Reviving Diana's charitable legacy under Catherine's stewardship could once again elevate Diana in the public imagination, threatening to draw uncomfortable comparisons between the beloved princess who once captured the world and the queen consort still striving for acceptance. Camilla knew that in the eyes of many, she would always be measured against Diana, and she was unwilling to give that shadow new life just as her own reign was beginning to find stability. Thus, behind the polished smiles and public unity, a quiet battle began to take shape. Catherine's heartfelt mission stood on one side, driven by love and compassion. Camilla's quiet resistance stood on the other, rooted in self-preservation and the delicate politics of the crown. And as the walls around Catherine's plans grew higher, the tension within the palace grew stronger, setting the stage for heartbreak that would soon become impossible to ignore. A secret blockage uncovered. The subtle resistance Catherine faced soon began to take on a sharper form. What had initially seemed like the natural delays of palace protocol now began to feel orchestrated. In the previous chapter, we saw how Camilla's quiet influence moved behind closed doors, shaping outcomes without leaving fingerprints. Catherine's growing suspicion that something more deliberate was at play would soon be confirmed in the most unsettling way. Plans for Catherine to formally collaborate with Diana's foundation had reached what appeared to be a critical moment. Advisors had worked tirelessly on a proposal linking Catherine's early childhood initiatives with Diana's long-standing causes of poverty relief and global health. A tentative timeline for announcement was even discussed, with the hope that such a partnership could be unveiled in a way that would capture the public imagination and honor Diana's legacy in a dignified manner. For Catherine, the moment felt within reach, yet just as the project was poised to advance, it suddenly stalled. Key figures withdrew their support, citing logistical issues and unclear approvals. Catherine was left bewildered, wondering how something so carefully crafted could unravel so swiftly. The truth began to emerge in whispers. Those close to the inner workings of the royal household quietly revealed that Camilla had expressed concerns about the optics of Catherine taking such a visible role within Diana's foundation. It was said not in anger, but in cool calculation, the kind of carefully measured observation that senior courtiers take seriously. Camilla's influence, though rarely exerted in public, carried undeniable weight in private. When she spoke, people listened. And when she hinted that certain moves might destabilize the delicate balance of the monarchy, the machinery of the palace moved accordingly. For Catherine, learning of this behind-the-scenes blockage was devastating. It was one thing to face the slow grind of royal bureaucracy. It was quite another to realize that her own family, those who should be united in service, were the ones quietly opposing her. To know that her mission to honor Diana had been quietly sabotaged by Camilla's influence was not only painful, but deeply personal. Diana was not simply a royal figure to Catherine. She was the mother-in-law she never met, yet whose spirit she often felt guiding her. To be barred from carrying forward that legacy by someone so closely tied to Diana's history felt like a cruel twist of fate. The revelation changed the way Catherine viewed the palace corridors she walked so gracefully in public. Behind the glittering ceremonies and the carefully staged photographs, there were rivalries and quiet struggles invisible to the world outside. She realized that every initiative, no matter how heartfelt, was subject to unseen forces pulling in opposite directions. Her desire to bring Diana's compassion back into the heart of the monarchy was now entangled in a silent power struggle, one where love and legacy collided with politics and self-preservation. The blockage was secret, but its effects were painfully real. Catherine was left not only with unanswered questions, but also with a growing sense of isolation. The royal mission of the heart she had envisioned was no longer a simple act of service. It had become a battleground where memory, influence, and power quietly clashed. And in this battle, Catherine was beginning to see just how heavy the shadow of Diana remained, and how fiercely it was guarded behind palace doors. Catherine's shock and heartbreak. The moment the truth reached Catherine, it struck her like a bitter wind. In the previous chapter, we traced how whispers of Camilla's influence became the silent barricade against her plans. For Catherine, what began as a hopeful anticipation of honoring Diana had turned into the devastating realization that she had been deliberately held back. It was not the public, not the press, not the rigid machinery of tradition that had blocked her path. It was someone within the family itself, someone whose presence had always been bound to Diana's story in ways that history would never forget. Catherine had long understood that being part of the monarchy meant compromises, patience, and resilience in the face of constant scrutiny. She had weathered criticism from the press, pressure from the institution, and the weight of expectation as the future queen. But this was different. This was personal. To discover that her chance to carry Diana's legacy forward had been quietly dismantled at the hands of Camilla left her not only disheartened but wounded at the deepest level. She had imagined Diana's foundation as a bridge, a way of binding the past to the present in a gesture of healing and hope. Instead, it became a wall, one erected not by strangers, but by someone who now sat at the very heart of the crown. Those who know Catherine describe her as composed, a woman rarely given to displays of temper. Yet behind palace walls, she was said to be visibly shaken when she realized what had happened. The disappointment cut sharply because this project had never been about power or prestige. It was about love. It was about showing William and her children that Diana's compassion still had a place in the family's future. To feel that this noble mission had been obstructed by Camilla's quiet hand filled her with grief. It was as though she had tried to reach for Diana's torch only to find it pulled away just as her fingers grazed the flame. William, always cautious in his words, was said to have shared in his wife's sorrow. For him, too, the foundation was more than charity. It was a living memory of his mother, one of the few institutions that carried her name and her spirit. To see Catherine's hope dashed was not only a blow to her, but to him as well. Yet William's silence was telling. As heir to the throne, he understood the peril of direct confrontation within the family. Catherine, though devastated, also knew that pressing the matter openly would risk widening a rift at the very top of the monarchy. And so her heartbreak remained contained within private walls, invisible to the cameras that so often captured her radiant smile. But grief does not vanish easily. Behind her polished composure, Catherine carried the weight of disappointment. She had discovered the unspoken truth of palace life. Even the most heartfelt intentions could be thwarted by politics and quiet rivalries. Her devotion to Diana's memory had been met not with unity, but with resistance, leaving her shaken. The heartbreak lingered not only because of what had been denied, but because of who had denied it. In that silence, Catherine came to realize that honoring Diana's legacy would not be as simple as extending a hand of compassion. It would mean stepping carefully through a landscape where every gesture was shadowed by history, and where even acts of love could become weapons in a hidden struggle for influence. The battle for public sympathy. Catherine's heartbreak, though hidden from the public eye, could not remain entirely invisible. In the previous chapter, we traced her devastation upon learning that her efforts to honor Diana had been quietly obstructed. But within the monarchy, personal pain rarely stays private for long. Rumors seep through the palace walls, carried by whispers among aides, and before long, the outlines of the struggle began to emerge. While Catherine continued to fulfill her duties with grace, there was an unmistakable tension surrounding the narrative of her work, a tension the media eagerly seized upon. For decades, the public had drawn comparisons between Catherine and Diana, often praising the Princess of Wales for embodying the same warmth and approachability that had defined William's mother. Catherine's charitable endeavors, particularly her focus on children and mental health, had only deepened these parallels. She was seen as a royal who genuinely cared, someone who listened intently, who knelt to children's level, who engaged with ordinary people in a way that felt authentic. When stories circulated that her work with Diana's foundation had stalled, many instinctively sympathized with her. The image of Catherine being prevented from carrying forward Diana's legacy resonated deeply with the public, who viewed her as the rightful heir to Diana's spirit of compassion. In contrast, Camilla's reputation, though rehabilitated in recent years, was still fragile. Her journey from vilified figure to queen consort had been long and carefully managed, but the scars of the past remained. To some, she would always be associated with the disruption of Diana's marriage and the turmoil of the 1990s. If Catherine appeared as the woman trying to honor Diana, then Camilla inevitably became the figure accused of standing in the way. Even if the queen consort never spoke a word publicly on the matter, perception mattered, and perception was not in her favor. This tension created a quiet battle for public sympathy, one waged not through speeches or direct confrontation, but through the contrasting images of two women. Catherine, radiant in her role as mother and charitable figure, embodied a vision of continuity and healing. Camilla, though dutiful and steady, carried the weight of history that many had not fully forgiven. The public's heart leaned toward Catherine, seeing in her a figure of both strength and vulnerability, someone who bore the monarchy's burdens while striving to uplift those often overlooked. Yet within the palace, this growing narrative was dangerous. The monarchy thrives on unity, or at least the appearance of it. To allow a perception of rivalry between Catherine and Camilla was to risk destabilizing the institution itself. The media's framing of Catherine as a wronged figure and Camilla as the hidden hand of resistance threatened to inflame old wounds that the royal family had worked tirelessly to heal. The crown could not afford another war of public sympathy, not when it had only just begun to find footing in a new reign. Still, the truth lingered in the silence. Catherine continued her duties with grace, but her heartbreak gave the public reason to rally around her. Camilla, meanwhile, maintained her quiet composure, aware that sympathy was not on her side. In this unspoken contest, the people's affection became a weapon of its own, tilting the balance toward Catherine and setting the stage for even greater tensions to unfold. William's silent dilemma. The quiet struggle for public sympathy between Catherine and Camilla created ripples that reached the one man who could feel its weight more than anyone else. Prince William, heir to the throne and son of the late Princess Diana, found himself caught in a dilemma that was as painful as it was inescapable. In the previous chapter, we saw how the narrative forming around Catherine drew the public to her side, while Camilla remained burdened by the past. For William, this was not merely a matter of image or politics. It was a deeply personal conflict that pulled at both his duty as future king and his loyalty as a husband and son. From his earliest years, William had been profoundly shaped by his mother's life and her tragic death. Diana's compassion and her sense of duty to the people were values he carried into adulthood, and it was no coincidence that he had chosen a partner like Catherine, whose heart mirrored much of what he had admired in his mother. To see Catherine's plans for Diana's foundation quietly undermined touched something raw within him. It was as though the legacy of the woman he had loved and lost was being pushed into the shadows yet again. And this time it was his wife who bore the pain of that dismissal. Yet William also knew the complexities of palace life better than most. He understood that Camilla, now queen consort, played a vital role in the stability of his father's reign. Any public rift between Catherine and Camilla would not only damage their personal lives but also cast a shadow over the monarchy itself. The crown survives on the perception of unity. To allow the image of division at the highest level would invite scrutiny and weaken the institution he would one day inherit. This awareness left William trapped between two roles: the protective husband who wanted to shield Catherine from heartbreak, and the disciplined heir who knew that silence was often the only shield the monarchy had. Behind closed doors, William's silence weighed heavily on him. Those close to the couple say that he offered Catherine quiet reassurance, reminding her of the importance of patience, of the slow-moving nature of royal change. But even as he spoke these words, he carried his own frustration. The irony was not lost on him that the same institution that had once failed to protect his mother now seemed to place barriers before his wife. In moments of reflection, William must have wondered if Diana herself would have urged him to be stronger, to speak louder, to resist the constraints of duty for the sake of love. Still, William's instincts leaned toward caution. He had seen firsthand how battles fought in the open could consume a royal life, turning compassion into controversy and devotion into division. Protecting Catherine meant shielding her not only from Camilla's resistance, but also from the firestorm that would follow if the truth became too visible. His dilemma was one without easy answers, a silent conflict that gnawed at him each day he walked the palace corridors. Thus, William bore his mother's memory, his wife's heartbreak, and his duty to the crown in a delicate balance that threatened to unravel at any moment. In the silence of his dilemma lay the seeds of future decisions that would shape not only his marriage and his family, but the very course of the monarchy itself. The legacy tug-of-war. William's silent struggle between protecting his wife and safeguarding the monarchy only deepened the sense that Diana's legacy was not resting peacefully, but rather being pulled in opposite directions. In the previous chapter, we saw how his dilemma weighed heavily upon him, binding his heart to Catherine's heartbreak while tethering his sense of duty to the institution his father now led. Yet beneath this silence, a larger question stirred. Who truly holds the right to Diana's memory? Is it her eldest son and his wife, who embody the compassion and humanity she once displayed? Or is it the monarchy itself, determined to control how her image is remembered, reshaped, and presented to the world? This unspoken tug-of-war played out in subtle ways, but its consequences were profound. Catherine represented a continuation of Diana's warmth, a natural inheritor of her spirit. The public embraced this connection almost instinctively, often remarking on the similarities between the two women in photographs, gestures, and even the way they dressed. To see Catherine take on Diana's charitable causes would have been to witness a living echo of the late princess, a comforting reminder that her compassion still had a place in the royal family. For the people, it seemed clear. Diana's legacy belonged to those who cherished her most, William and Catherine. But from within the monarchy, the story was not so simple. Diana's memory, though powerful, had long been a source of discomfort for the crown. Her independence, her refusal to conform, and her tragic death had etched scars into the institution that time had never fully healed. For those now steering the monarchy, particularly Camilla, Diana's legacy was a reminder of division, scandal, and a painful chapter they wished to carefully manage rather than revive. To allow Catherine to step so fully into Diana's world was to risk ceding control of that memory, and with it, the narrative of modern royalty. Camilla's quiet resistance reflected this tension. While Catherine sought to honor Diana with sincerity, Camilla understood that elevating Diana's memory could also diminish her own standing. As queen consort, her task was to project stability and loyalty to Charles, but the public's enduring affection for Diana always threatened to overshadow her. In this sense, the tug-of-war was not only about charity, but about influence, about which figure the monarchy would allow to dominate its story in the years to come. For William, the struggle was personal in ways that defied politics. He did not want his mother reduced to a carefully managed symbol, nor her legacy kept at arm's length by those who had once resisted her. For Catherine, the battle cut even deeper, because her genuine devotion had been met not with encouragement, but with opposition. Together, they found themselves at the heart of a conflict that neither of them had sought, but both were forced to endure. The tug-of-war over Diana's legacy was more than a family dispute. It was a question of memory, of love, and of power. And as the quiet struggle unfolded behind the palace gates, the world outside watched closely, sensing that the shadow of Diana was not fading but rising once again to challenge the crown she once wore in name, but never in spirit. The future of Diana's charitable flame. The tug-of-war over Diana's legacy left the monarchy standing at a crossroads, its choices heavy with meaning and consequence. In the previous chapter, we explored how Catherine, William, and Camilla each became entangled in the question of who truly holds the right to preserve Diana's memory. Yet, as the tension deepened, one truth became undeniable. The flame of Diana's charitable spirit could not be extinguished. Whether carried forward within the walls of the palace or kindled anew beyond its gates, it would continue to burn, demanding to be honored. For Catherine, the heartbreak she endured became a turning point. She began to realize that Diana's legacy could not depend solely on institutional approval. While the crown might attempt to manage or even restrain it, the deeper force lay in the people who still revered Diana and in the work that continued to touch lives across the world. Catherine understood that her role as Princess of Wales gave her both the platform and the responsibility to embody compassion in her own way. If doors to Diana's foundation were closed, then new doors could be opened elsewhere. Her mission was not to replicate Diana's path, but to continue her spirit in forms uniquely her own. William, too, carried this awareness. His mother's memory had been both a gift and a burden, shaping his life in ways he could never escape. But as he looked toward the future, he knew that her legacy would not survive through control or suppression. It would survive through authenticity, through actions that reflected the love and courage she once displayed. By standing beside Catherine and supporting her in her work, William could honor Diana in a way that transcended politics. Together, they could keep her flame alive not as a relic of the past, but as a living force for good. Camilla, meanwhile, faced her own quiet reckoning. Though her resistance had shielded her from immediate comparisons, the long shadow of Diana would never fully retreat. History had already decided that Diana's image was eternal, her story unshakable. Camilla's reign as queen consort would be measured against that backdrop, whether she wished it or not. Her choice was to either continue guarding against the past or to allow a more generous acknowledgement of Diana's enduring presence. Time would reveal whether she chose preservation or reconciliation, but the struggle would always remain part of her legacy. Beyond the palace, the public continued to hold Diana's memory close. Every act of kindness from Catherine, every tender gesture toward children or vulnerable communities, was seen as an echo of Diana's compassion. The people did not need official announcements to know when Diana's spirit was alive. They recognized it in Catherine's humanity and William's quiet strength, and in the values they passed on to their children. In that sense, Diana's charitable flame belonged not to the monarchy alone, but to the millions who still believed in her example. And so the future of Diana's legacy rests in a delicate balance. It may be guarded, resisted, or reshaped within the palace, but its truest expression will always live in the acts of compassion that defy politics and protocol. For Catherine and William, the path forward may not be easy, but it is clear. By keeping the flame of service alive, they ensure that Diana's spirit continues to illuminate the monarchy, casting its light into a future still uncertain, yet forever touched by her enduring presence. And so, behind the grandeur of crowns and ceremonies, lies a struggle far more human than regal. Catherine's heartbreak, William's silent burden, and Camilla's quiet resistance reveal a monarchy still haunted by Diana's memory. Yet Diana's flame endures, flickering in the compassion of her son and daughter-in-law, and in the hearts of millions who still cherish her. Whether nurtured within the palace or beyond its gates, that flame refuses to be extinguished. In the end, the true legacy of Diana is not a battle for control, but a light of love, compassion, and humanity that no crown can contain. What are your thoughts on these? Share in the comments, share, and subscribe to this channel for more. See you next time.